good evening. I'm State Senator Jamie Eldridge, and just so honored to have Mike Joseph, one of the co-founders of One Marlborough and a Marlborough resident, to join me for my continued discussion, reaching out to Black community leaders in the district I represent. So Mike, it's such an honor to have you on the forum, and thanks for coming on tonight. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me here. I'm excited to be here, actually. Yeah. I'm just happy to be here.
Yeah, and we were chatting a little before we went live, but we really, we met this year at I think the first racial justice rally in Marlborough by One Marlborough, and for those that don't know Marlborough as well, one of the bells from one of the first rebellions that led to the Civil War, the John Brown bell at Harper's Ferry is still in Marlborough, and there's a small park dedicated to that bell, and that's where we had the rally. So I thought that was just extremely on point, and just the energy from that day, I still remember it now. It was just an incredible, really moving afternoon and night, and I remember your remarks. So I appreciate you and Pam sort of co-founding One Marlborough, and just curious to know how you came to start that organization, if you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, so I want to say it started with Sam Perlman. She's on the city council. So she introduced me to Pam. Yeah, she introduced me to Pam. And when I first met Pam, it was her and a few other people. We all got on a video call like this. And like they had the meeting, they told me what they wanted to do. And that meeting, like I really didn't say like one or two words. I was just listening, because I've been a part, or I've seen groups where, everyone wants to come together for something, but you can tell they have a different agenda. So I wasn't sure, like, okay, is this something that's legit? Is this something that they're just doing it just to look good? So I really wasn't sure. But then when the peace vigil where we first met, once that happened, and we saw the amount of people that showed up, and then the other speakers that were there, it just kind of validated them for me. So I was like, okay, this is something I can really stand behind, and this is something I really want to be a part of, especially because it's helping push that needle forward. So, like another thing too, just to give you a little background on me, like I've never really been into politics. To be honest, every time I heard the word politician, I always got like a stank face. I'm like, oh, he's just another politician. That's what I used to always think. And then when you went to speak, right, you spoke before me, and then you said something that made me say, okay, I think this guy's a good guy. And it really was when you said, to hold each other accountable. And then you were telling all of us to hold you accountable. And that was something that all my life, on different sports teams I've been on, different organizations I've been on, I've never heard anyone say anything like that, to say, hey, it's okay to hold me accountable. And that's what we have to do. So it really like changed my eye on how, politics, and it made me say, okay, I think I should learn a lot more about it, and not choosing to be ignorant. Let me get to know other people and network and things like that. But really, I want to say it was Sam who introduced me to Pam. And then when Pam told me the idea, that's when, I said, let's do it. And, we had several meetings since then. We've had marches, all sorts of events like Juneteenth. We've had listening sessions. So we've done a lot since June. And I want to say that one thing about One Marlborough is the members, right? And I'm not just talking about everyone inside of the group. I'm talking about Pam, Emily, Jamie, Robert. Like they're just all hardworking people. Rosalind, like they all have that energy to keep the needle going, and I appreciate them. And I feel that. And if I forgot any names, I apologize. But we have a big group, but the energy inside this group is something I haven't seen before, right? This is obviously very new for a lot of people. It's very new for me. I want to say I've been a social activist. I've always gone to protests, like even back in 2017 and even a few back in college. But I want to say, since George Floyd, that's when I really started to get more involved into the movement.
That's fantastic. And I'm just curious, how long have you lived in in Marlborough, and did you grow up in Marlborough or from another community or state?
So I used to live in Waltham,
Mm-hmm.
right? I used to live in Waltham. I used to live in Prospect Hill, and when I was like 10 or 11, that's when my family moved to Marlborough. So when I lived in Waltham, the neighborhood I was in was predominantly Black. It was very diverse. Like the schools are very diverse. But when I moved to Marlborough, you know, it was a lot of the time I'd be like the only Black kid in my class. You know, so it was a very different experience for me. I want to say for the most part, Marlborough's been welcoming, right? But it does that doesn't go to say that that racism doesn't take place in Marlborough. I mean, I've experienced racism here. My family has. A lot of people have. But I want to say that despite all of that, I want to say that the people that, you know, are allies, people who are fighting alongside us against these injustices, their voices have been a lot louder than the negative.
That is good to hear, and I'm just curious that some sort of your, and I know again we talked a little bit before, but you know, one of the things that I've tried to do a lot of outreach in Marlborough, although there's always, you know, more I can do, is really trying to reach out to, you know, voices of people who aren't in power. You know, I do a lot of outreach to the different immigrant communities in Marlborough, interact a lot with the Marlborough, you know, food pantry, you know, some of the social service programs that operate in Marlborough, because, you know, the reality is that, you know, there is a significant amount of poverty in Marlborough. It is a diverse city, but I often find that, you know, more often than not, that at least, you know, many of the elected officials in Marlborough, it doesn't seem like there's a recognition that it's a diverse of a city as it is. It's certainly the most diverse community of the 14 communities I represent.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with you on that. I feel like it's not talked about enough. There's a lot of issues in Marlborough that aren't talked about enough. 100% agree with you, man. 100% agree with you.
And I know that you've been doing a lot of outreach with elected officials. Do you see that changing now? Do you see changes, especially in since the murder of George Floyd and racial justice protests across the country?
Yeah, I feel that like you know, they're responding more. You know, like like example for me and you, like we're on a call like this. Would we be having this conversation if it wasn't for George Floyd? I really don't think so. You know, so I definitely feel that a lot more people who are on the proactive side are getting, you know, to know their communities and getting to know their community leaders. Again, like I said, this being an activist is something very new to me, so I've been learning as I go along. But one thing that I say holds true is you definitely have to network. You definitely have to talk with people and build those kind of relationships, because at the end of the day, it does start at the community level.
Absolutely. And in terms of that outreach, and it was great to see such a diverse group of Marlborough residents at that rally, is, you know, how do you sort of continue that outreach in Marlborough? Because I think that's one of the things I've kind of struggled with a little bit, is that, you know, you've got downtown Marlborough. I don't really see that much interaction. There's not really too much of a sort of meeting place in Marlborough. And I think also because Marlborough is a city, in some ways, it's harder for people to gather and advocate because you have, you know, a city council, whereas the other communities I represent, you know, there's town meeting, you know, there's more of a sense that, you know, of people that coming together to advocate. So how do you keep those diverse interactions going?
So, well, obviously having a Facebook group definitely helps, right? Because that's where everyone can kind of come together and
Yep.
share different ideas. But I want to say it's just consistently having meetings and setting goals and deadlines for certain events or ideas. So like, for example, we have an event that we're planning to do something with the Marlborough Police Department. So right, what we're working on now is creating the outline, the idea, making sure the messaging is right. And then what we do is we set a deadline for it. So, you know, we have to make sure, like, for example, today's the 15th. We want to make sure within the next couple of weeks that we at least have an outline of what we want to do. And then we'll have our next meeting with the Marlborough Police Department and then talk with them about their ideas on the event. But I want to say is definitely having goals and definitely just having regular meetings. Like, I'm not saying you guys got to get together every week, but me and my team, we meet every other week. And every time when we meet, we go over the agenda, we go over our goals and what we did to push that needle. And then we say, okay, this is what we should do moving forward, and we continue acting. And I feel like that really helps keep the momentum going, because obviously what happened back in June, like the fire was under everybody. Everybody was in the moment, and everybody was Black Lives Matter. I want to get out and do something. And it's great to go out and protest. It's great to share things on social media. But one thing that I quickly realized is going outside with a sign, that only does so much, right? You got to have these meetings. You got to talk to your politicians. You got to talk to your local government. You got to see who's in charge and who makes the final decision on what. And that's one thing that I quickly realized. I'm like, okay, this is how this type of world operates. So we have to have these kind of meetings and conversations. So it's not something that could be done overnight. Like, you're talking about systemic racism. Like, this is not, that took years to build. It's going to take generations to destroy, you know? So it's having these kind of conversations and meetings and just, you know, feeding off of each other's energy, right? Like last night we had our last organizational meeting, and this, again, like even the energy in on those calls, it just helps inspire us or help encourage us to keep it going, because, and I'm sure you're aware of it, doing this kind of work is very draining. You know, it can be very overwhelming, because it's like, you know, okay, here's another person who just got killed by police, or, you know, this is what's happening to a Black woman in hospitals, and oh no, there's kids in cages. You know, there's so much going on, and if you really consume yourself with it, it's really gonna mess with your mental. So being able to have a support group that you can go to, or having a safe place, really does help keep that momentum going and keep that energy.
That is great to hear. And again, having those regular meetings, you know, I've seen a lot of organizations sort of pop up in many of my communities, and I'm always trying to get a sense of, you know, what is the work that you're doing. I know, you know, I live in Acton. You know, there's an effort to bring in anti-racism or anti-bias training into the schools, as well as things like saying, you know, why are the vast majority of teachers, you know, white, not reflecting the increasing diversity, you know, of the student body. And then obviously there's questions around, you know, around policing is, you know, putting aside the state reforms, which I think are critical. You know, what are the actions that can happen in each police department across the Commonwealth? And I'm just curious, is there an agenda like that yet for One Marlborough, or is that coming together as far as the changes you and your fellow leaders would like to see?
So we do have an agenda. So what we did was we kind of broke it down into 3 committees, right? We have one judicial, one local government, and one focusing on the school systems. Obviously, with the school, it's been tough with COVID-19, but our real goal is to we want to make it so in the Marlborough Public Schools that it is a safe place for all marginalized people, right? And we want to make sure that they're creating some sort of diversity with the staff. But again, with COVID-19, it's kind of slowed that down. With our local government committee, they're very active. Emily is head on of that committee, and she's crushing it right now. But what they're getting together is, you know, learning what the city codes are. We're creating education materials. So just like how on our last time we had our online meeting where you kind of broke down the police reform bill, we're trying to work something like that inside of One Marlborough. That way, you know, anybody could understand what's going on, because whenever anybody passes legislation, you know, it's 70 pages long, or any bill is like 70 pages long, and it's all this words and jargon that does not, the average person just wouldn't know, right? And we want to make it easier for them to digest and learn. And also what we're working towards is creating a good working relationship with the mayor of Marlborough. We have yet to have a meeting with him, but we that's one of our goals too. And then obviously judicial is where we're working with our justice systems. We want to create more diversity in our police department. We've had multiple meetings with the police department. They've been pretty good. They've given us all the data we've asked for. We're analyzing that now, and as soon as that's done, we're going to be able to provide that to the public and the members of our group. And we also want to create a better relationship between the Marlborough Police Department and the community. One thing that people say is, you know, what's happening across the world isn't happening in Marlborough. And yeah, you're right. It's not happening in Marlborough, but just because it isn't happening doesn't mean it's not happening. So if we see something like that terrible, like with George Floyd, it's okay, what are we doing to prevent that? you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that every police department, everyone's looking at every police department as they should, because we got to hold people with authority accountable, you know. And for me, the end goal of everything is I want One Marlborough to be that organization that does hold its local government, its schools, its policing, all accountable. And I feel like that way we'd definitely be able to create change, at least starting in Marlborough. And who knows, maybe other neighboring cities and towns might take notice, and they might want to, you know, follow whatever models and strategies we use to better our communities to do it for them.
Absolutely. And you know, to your point earlier, it is exhausting, right? And especially, I mean, you're doing this as a volunteer after your full-time job, and it is exhausting. And I think one of the interesting things that one of my colleagues said during the debate on the police reform, this is, you know, Senator Sonia Chang Diaz, the only woman of color in the state Senate, is that, you know, when you look at the halls of Beacon Hill, there's literally only one Black lobbyist who is advocating on, you know, racial justice. So when you look at, you know, the whole host of issues that we take on, you know, how to sort of amplify, you know, Black voices, whether, you know, at the State House or in communities, because, you know, I think that there are a number of, you know, obstacles and challenges there. And I'm just curious, whatever you're, you know, comfortable to talk about, but what, you know, as a Black man in Marlborough, in Massachusetts, I mean, what is your experience been, and you know, what sort of systemic or direct racism have you seen, if you're comfortable talking about it?
Okay. So yeah, I feel like I mean, there's a couple stories I can tell. I'll tell one that was. I mean, do you want something more recent, or is it okay? Because I feel, or can I say something 10 years ago? Like, does it matter?
Oh yeah, anything that you'd like to talk about. Yep. So it can be 10 years ago. Okay. It can be more recent. Yep.
Yeah. So one story that, I mean, this one sticks with me for forever. I remember it was me, my brother, and one of our other friends. We were walking to, like, where I lived, it was like a block away from the gas station, right? And we were walking up there to buy some snacks, and you know, I go down to, before we enter the gas station, right? Before we enter that little store, I sit down on the curb, I tie my shoe. As soon as I look up, right, 3 cop cars pull up on us, and this is in Marlborough, right? And again, this was like 10 years ago, I mean, the Marlborough Police Department, what it was 10 years ago, is very different than what it is now, but it doesn't, it still happened, right? So 3 cars pull up on us, and I lift my head, I'm like, what's going on? And they all get out of their car, they say, you know, you guys are at the right place at the wrong time. And we're like, what? And 2 other cruisers show up. So there's 5 cruisers. These cops grab us, throw us against the wall, like search us. And I want to say, yeah, it was true. Like it sucked, right? Because we didn't do anything wrong. Like we were just going to buy some snacks. And I just remember one cop was really trying to get one of my other friends, like, temper to go up. Like he kept asking, like, hey, how do you spell your name? And he spelled it. He's like, okay, can you spell it again? He spelled it again. He's like, can you spell it again? Like little things to, like, really trigger
microaggressions.
Yeah, exactly. And then you know, they didn't find anything on us because we didn't have anything, right? And you know, they searched us. They said, all right, go home. And it's like, you know, we left, and we were just like, did this really just happen? Like, we see it in the media, you know, we hear about it in the music, but then I'm like, I live in Marlborough, so it's not that bad. And then it happens to you, and when it happens to you, you never see it coming. You know, no one thinks anything like that's going to happen to you, you know? So yeah, I've dealt with that. And then in high school, and going through school, and I always dealt with microaggressions.
Yeah. Let me ask a question about it. Was there an explanation about what?
No, there was no explanation.
Yeah.
It was just, hey, you guys are at the, I'm never going to forget the guy said, he's like, you're at the right place at the wrong time. And I'm like, and then he started mentioning, I'm never going to forget, he started mentioning, like, all these gangs and Marvel. Like, are you in this gang or that one? And we're like, what are you talking about? You know, it was just like a really shitty moment, but it happened. And it just sucked. You know, but one thing that I realized about Marlborough too is, you know, even though there's not a lot of blatant racism, like, I've dealt with blatant racism in Marlborough, but they were from, like, really older people who seemed senile. Like, I remember I was walking by, and the dude at the park was like, N-words, get at, whatever. He gave us his 2 cents, and we just like, all right, we flipped him off and walked away. But one thing that I noticed is that in Marlborough, there's not a lot of blatant racism. It's a lot more microaggressions. So, we had ONE MARLBOROUGH, we hosted a listening session where we had other residents of Marlborough come, and they would explain their stories. And then recently, Kanan Severin, he hosted a private event for the Black students of Marlborough High, where myself, my wife, and other Black alumni from Marlborough got to come together and share our experiences going through school, and they would share their experiences now. And a lot of the same microaggressions that I dealt with growing up, they're dealing with now. So it's not like it stopped, even though it's 2020, like it still happens. And a lot of people, I want to say, they're either just ignorant to the fact, like, hey, can I touch your hair? It's like, no, you shouldn't. You should. Even though I'm bald, it doesn't apply to me anymore. But like to anyone, it's like, no, you don't do that. You don't say those kind of things. And so it's still apparent that there is racism in Marlborough. Like when we had our march, a couple months ago, we held a march. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure this is the first march, for BLM in general. I don't even know when was the last time I've ever seen a march in Marlborough, to be honest.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah, so it was really, it was a great event. It was a great turnout. We had permits, so the police department was escorting us to make sure that, nothing bad would happen to us. And I mean, throughout that march, we had a lot of people who would drive by, and it was two things. Like you had a group of people who would drive by who would support us, and then you have another group of people driving by who would just be, yelling the nastiest things and, just being real negative about what we were trying to do, and say, all we want is just equality. Like we just don't want, we've seen people getting killed by the police. We just don't want that to happen anymore. It's like, it's not that complex, it's not, but for some people it is. And then like, we just want equality, across the board, not just with Black lives, but we want it with immigrants. We want it with LGBTQ. We want it with across the board. And I don't get why it's so hard for some people to understand that.
Exactly. And I think one of the things that I've been really trying to highlight, as someone who, describes myself as a progressive, and you have people in Massachusetts who describe themselves as progressive or liberal or forward thinking. And yet often, whether it's, progressives in general or people of color bring up, well, what you just said or your action, is a form of systemic racist or is offensive, is how, often, sort of white people really getting upset about that and saying, how dare you call me a racist, and really, really being very sort of emotional about it and not reflecting on, their actions. And it's I think it's a major barrier to making progress in Massachusetts.
Yeah, 100%. I think one thing, especially when you're dealing with that type of person who's really just going off of emotion and not, just actual facts or information or empathy, I feel like we can't, you have to pick and choose your battles. And this is what I tell like everyone inside of ONE MARLBOROUGH is like, we have to pick and choose our battles, meaning there's going to be some people who want to learn, and there's going to be some people who are just trolling you, who are just, they just want to they want to see you get angry. They want to see, they're trying to really get you to blow up. There's those type of people. So it's very easy to identify, right? You have someone who say, hey man, like I've had people since George Floyd reach out to me that, I played on football teams with, growing up, and they said, hey man, I see what's going on. What can I do to help? Or what can I, like I understand my ignorance of all this, like this, they're waking up, in my opinion, they're waking up and they're coming to me and they're doing the research. So you have people that are actually working to rewiring their brains, right? Because it's like, it's deep rooted. Because one thing that I always like to talk about is, the conversations that we have at home, right? It's not going to take a face on Facebook or on a YouTube video to really rewire someone's, thinking. It's going to take a lot. It's not just that one talk. It's going to be a multiple conversations. And one thing I always say is, growing up, like I'm a family of immigrants. My parents were from Haiti. They moved over here, and and then I was born. So like I see a couple of different sides. Like I see what the Black people experience, and I understand what immigrants experience. So that's what I kind of bring to the table. You know, growing up, what my mom would always tell me is, hey, you know, because of the color of your skin, you're not going to be judged the way you should. Like, you're not going to be treated as equal. And it didn't make sense to me, but pretty much what she told me was, you got to work twice as hard as everybody else. That's what she always said. You got to work twice as hard. You go into a store, don't, you know, keep your hands to yourself. You don't want people to accuse you of anything. And, you know, my dad would tell me, you know, don't get earrings, don't get dreadlocks, don't get braids, like, you know, growing up, because you don't want to give the enemy ammunition to say, okay, he looks like a bad person. You know, like, so I feel like a lot of people growing up, it sucks because you can't really truly express yourself because of that. And I feel like a lot of it does get internalized within the Black community. And I feel like that alone doesn't get talked about enough, about what's going on internally amongst the Black community and the whole self-hate thing and things like that.
Absolutely. And I know there's been a lot of stories about it, of, you know, black parents, you know, having to have that conversation with their children about, you know, what you just said about certain, you know, actions, or if, you know, someone's driving, you know, gets pulled over by the police, you know, where you put your hands and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and the thing, I guess my point is you see, these are the conversations that are happening in a Black home, right? But then it's, what are the conversations that are happening in a white home, right? And the thing is a lot of it doesn't get talked about because, like I said, we just did a talk with the Black students of Marlborough High, and they're dealing with the same microaggressions I dealt with, you know, 10, 15 years ago, you know? So, you know, I feel like the people who know, you gotta talk to your families, right? And it's going to be tough. It's going to be uncomfortable, but you have to be okay with being uncomfortable, because that's the only way we'll be able to see any type of change. Me being on this call and what I've done so far the past, you know, 4 or 5 months, it's been extremely uncomfortable for me. But one thing that I've come to realize is it's okay, you know. And once I was able to really understand that, like, it's okay because it's for the greater good, you know.
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, a message that and you've spoken to it, but it's one that I really think that white people, especially, you know, white people, have some, you know, level of power in the community, or elective office, or in business, is that we can't just count on the Black community or Black residents to do this education and create this change, but the white residents really need to speak up as well. And certainly, you know, one example in my hometown of Acton is that some of the Black and Latino graduates from Acton Boxborough Regional High School have created an organization to look at things like, you know, increasing the diversity of teachers and anti-racism curriculum. And one of the issues, and this is part of the police reform bill that I highlighted on another forum that you were on, is the conversation around school resource officers, around police officers, you know, being in the schools. And, you know, just my talking about the fact that, you know, these graduates of Acton Boxborough had observed that, you know, sometimes they would see a police officer follow, you know, a group of Black students, but they wouldn't be following or focused on the white students that they were gathering. And I had an elected official in Acton, you know, call me and, you know, very upset. And you're saying the police are racist. And I'm saying, well, what I'm saying is that there's systemic racism, there's bias, and we all have it, including myself. And, you know, until we can sort of call this stuff out, it's not going to change. And so, you know, it's not just the policy, but it's calling out, you know, white people who have power, that they need to be, you know, conscious of our biases.
Exactly. And again, I feel like with the way the world is now, the way that we can access so much information, right? Like, it's not like, you know, you can be like, oh man, well, okay, I'm white and I want to not be racist. What do I do? Let me ask a Black person. It's like go on Google, man. You know what I mean? Like, just Google it. There's so much information out there. It blows my mind how, you know, people forget that there's a search engine like google.com, or you can go to YouTube if you're a visual learner, right? And you can get your information there. There's so much information out there. and a lot of it is like willing to be, it's a willful ignorance, you know. And it's like you can't do that. You can't do that if you're on the side of being progressive. If you want things to change, if you really are a true ally, you can't, you know, oh, I'm just going to wait till my black friend explains it to me. It's like, no, just do the research on your own, because black people as a whole, you know, we're tired of it. We're tired of having to keep explaining ourselves. You know, we've been talking about police brutality longer than, I mean, 20, 30, 40, I mean, forever, right? It's in the music, it's in the art, you know, it's in everything. We've always been talking about it. It's just that now with that one video with George Floyd, it really opened the eyes of a lot of people, you know? So it's definitely, I feel like the consciousness of everyone is starting to really awaken.
Absolutely. And you know, I don't know why it was the breaking point given the shooting and killing of so many other you know, Black Americans from law enforcement, but there was, you know, you really could feel that change. And that's, you know, that's why I believe that you have the House and Senate, you know, pass police reform, which is something, you know, we're still trying to get agreement on and get to the governor's desk. But beyond sort of those policies, are there things out there that you would like to see happen at the state level, or things that you think can break down and eliminate systemic racism and anti-Blackness in America?
I definitely think that if the same way that, you know, you were able to reach out to me and, you know, we were able to have this conversation, I wish that I can see this across the board, right? That other senators would get really involved in their communities and not just, okay, they got voted and then that's it. You know, they sit on their chair and then that's it. Like, I mean, if I look at your stuff, like I did my research on you, man, when we first talked, like I said, after that first peace vigil, I looked into you and I'm like, this guy's like really in the community. Like you're not just, you know, like everyone else, like, you know, you're literally in the community. There's pictures, videos of you, not just in Marlborough, acting all across the state, going to all these different demonstrations. So like what that shows me is, okay, this guy gets it. What is it going to take for all these other guys to get it? Right? Because I feel if we can get everyone else on the same page, everyone else, that's what's going to help change. And nothing too is that whole sense of community. I feel a lot of it's going to have to start with the community. Again, like I said, I was never into politics. I mean, I shouldn't say I was not. I was just never. I want to say I just never got into it. I was just like, oh, okay, who's going to be our president? Nothing's going to change. It's Congress does everything, so I don't care who's going to. Like, you know, that's the kind of mindset I had. And then thinking now, I'm like, you can't think like that. You know, like people died for our right to vote. You know, people fought for our rights. You can't something like oh, I'm not going to vote because it doesn't matter. It's like, no, it does matter. And because you're not voting, it's the reason why these things like George Floyd happened. Right? Like if people were more, you know, aware of how these policies are put into place and with the Jim Crow laws and things like that, they'd really see how systemic racism is. Like, for example, the whole Juneteenth, people just like a lot of people just learned about it this year. I mean, I've known about it. Maybe I think I first heard about it like 2 years ago. You know, and I'm 29, so it's like they don't teach about it. They don't teach us in schools. Like I really feel like we definitely need to change what's going on at the state level. I feel like we need to change things on every level, but we definitely need to start adding more Black history into our education books, and not just leave it for, you know, the shortest month of the year. And we're only going to talk about Martin Luther King. We'll glance over Malcolm X and maybe talk about, you know, we need to do more. We need to do more, you know. And one thing that I feel that also doesn't get talked about enough is you know, the massacres that's happened in the U.S. Like I want to say acts of domestic terrorism against Black people. You know, there've been a lot. Philadelphia, they bombed. So there was. I'm not. Yeah, I think the social group's name was called Move. If I remember correctly, it's called Move. And they literally like bombed them, and they left like hundreds of people homeless. And it was just, it's mind blowing to me that happened. You know, it's mind blowing. And then like, I feel like that needs to get talked about enough so people are aware that, hey, this is true. People aren't making it up. It's not no one bringing up any false trauma. Like, no, this does happen. This did happen. And one thing I always, it kind of irks me because again, like Breonna Taylor, what happened with her, you know, people think that, okay, that happened all the way over there. You know, that happened in Massachusetts too, you know, with Yuri Stamps. Like a lot of people a lot of people aren't aware of that. That in 2011, you know, a SWAT team came in and they killed him by accident, right?
Yep.
And you know, it's like it, and he still didn't get his justice yet, you know. So
yeah, and it wasn't until the protests that there finally was an independent review by prosecutors.
Exactly, and it's crazy because you know, it happened in 2011, and then I think the last time it got looked at was during Ferguson. You know, when it happened in Ferguson, I think that helped bring awareness to the case, and then you know, obviously now because of George Floyd. And one thing that a lot of people will argue is, you know, the media is trying to put us against each other. Like, you know, ever since George Floyd, now we're seeing all these other cop killings happen that happened years ago. It's like, yeah, you are, because now you're listening. Like, you guys thought this was like a one-off thing and it never happened. It's like, no, these things have happened, and there's still these cases that still haven't been that have been closed, and they need to be opened up again. You know, like Breonna's case was closed and they reopened it, and then obviously we had heard the verdict, which blows my mind how that even happened. But again, it's like a lot of people try to blame the media for trying to pit us against each other, but I always say, like, you know, take a step back and just look at everything from like a logic standpoint. And it's like, if you see somebody sharing a video of a police brutality happening, you shouldn't be like, oh, that happened 2 years ago. In my mind, it's like what's the what is the time, like, why is that, like, why does that matter? It happened, and that cop got away with it. You know, he wasn't held accountable, and that family still needs justice. So whether it happened 2 years ago, 5, 10, 20, or if it happened yesterday, like, it still needs to be looked at, because justice needs to be served, right? So that's how I kind of look at things. I can't look at it, oh, it happened 2-3 years ago, so I'm just going to forget about it.
Absolutely. And I think one of the issues, and, you know, this is part of the, I would say one of the major parts of the police reform is first of all, the state licensing of police officers, so that, you know, there's a process to evaluate, you know, whether a police officer is fit to be an officer, if there are complaints against, you know, him or her, but also the training. And, you know, I do think that is something I always try to bring up around the training, is that, you know, what kind of impact will training have on addressing implicit or unconscious bias, you know, whether by law enforcement or teachers or, you know, elected officials. And just curious if you know, have a perspective on training, because there are the cynics that say that, you know, it's not about, the training really won't make much of a difference. It's about, you know, reducing these sort of negative interactions at all between, you know, law enforcement and communities of color, especially in more diverse communities.
I definitely think training is a huge aspect of it. Like, I feel that it should be like, just like you gotta go to college 4 years for, like, if you want to be a lawyer, if you want to be a prosecutor, and, you know, when it comes to, like, you got to do years of schooling for it. Like, years of, you know, you got to be qualified. You know, your people's lives are in your hand. So I just, like, with a police officer, I'm like, why isn't it that long? Why isn't there more criteria needed to be a police officer? You know, like, I definitely think training, they definitely need to have training. They 100%. And you know, I hope that whatever happens with the bill, that is a part of it, is that they do need to have a better training process, really, to help filter out any of the bad eggs that come on. I definitely think, you know, like, to be very frank with you, man, I wanted to be a cop at one point, you know, like, yeah, I wanted to, I went to school for criminal justice, and a minor in psych. I got my degree. You know, I was interning at the Superior Courthouse in the probation department. So I met a lot of good people, and, but like, I don't, like, I just, you know, I took the test, I passed the test, I passed, you know, I passed all the qualifications, but then, you know, I got an offer to be a per diem officer for Marlborough Police Department years ago. But this was, this was at the time, though, I think this was around Tamir Rice. or it was Trayvon Martin. It was one of those where it happened, and I was just like, I can't. I was having all these conflicting, feelings about it. Do I want to put on a uniform and I see that same uniform killing people who look like me? Like, how does that, you know what I mean? So it really made it tough for me to say, this is what I want to do. So I just changed career paths, and I went into marketing and sales, and now I'm in marketing and advertising. But yeah, like I did. I took the test.
I had no idea. Wow.
Yeah, I took the civil service exam. I got 100 on it. And then after that, it was a physical test I had to take. You pass that, and then you do a background check. They do a psych evaluation, and then they send you a letter. It was like those 4 steps. Then they obviously check your references, but I mean, I feel like you definitely need. I feel like as that process was, I definitely think there needs to be more hoops you need to jump through to be considered a cop. I definitely think they need to do a little bit more research, or they didn't need to do more training too, man. Like it's just crazy to me how the world that we live in, and then there's cops doing this, and then there's some people who are trying to justify it, and then it blows my mind how they say, well, he does have a drug record, he does have a criminal record, and it's like it's like Martin Luther King has a criminal record. You know what I'm saying? Like, what are you trying to say? Like, it doesn't make sense to me. So, that's my 2 cents on
it. And obviously, part of that is who our elected officials are, and who's at the table, who's in the building, if you will. At the State House, it's been great to see that the Black legislative aides at the State House, so people that work for state representatives and state senators, including one of my aides, who's Kenyan American, is they have formed what they're calling Beacon Block. So black legislative aides of color, to focus on everything from pay equity, to people joking about people's names if the person is an immigrant, to not being given as much more serious policy work, and also what is the process to file a complaint if there's racist behavior or mistreatment. And so that's been really good to see. It's really just the beginning stages. I'm just curious, do you feel that there are the opportunities in Marlborough, whether the schools, whether City Hall, or of course elected officials, to see more diversity in the sort of government institutions in Marlborough?
I mean, I definitely want to see diversity. I feel like, well, kind of just being really frank with you, man, is when we spoke with the police department, that's the kind of question we asked them. I was like, okay, what are you guys doing, to help bring in a more diverse staff? And one of the issues that they're having is there's just not enough Black applicants, or not enough Latino applicants, or people of color. So that's one thing that we have to consider, right? Is there enough people that want to do that kind of job, right? When it comes to our government and our school systems, I'm pretty sure that there's people of color, there's marginalized people who want to be included. Is it happening? I feel like after George Floyd, a lot of companies, what they're doing is they're hiring these consultants to kind of help train them so they can get their messaging right, so they could be more diverse. So I feel like something like that is only time will tell. It's like time will tell with that when it comes to like our local governments in Marlborough. Right now, it's not as diverse, right? I remember I went to, I think it was, we were celebrating women, right, at Marlborough, right behind City Hall. And one thing I realized is that, yep. And then one thing I noticed is like, okay, I see all these women here, and there's not one woman of color. There's not one woman that, no one Spanish, no one this, no one that. It was just all white women. And it's great that there is women that we're celebrating, but it's like we have to be more diverse. We need to be more inclusive. And then is there a gate? Is there a glass ceiling, or are there just not enough people ask or going for those kind of positions.
Mhm.
Right. So that's the kind of information that we're looking for to really say, okay, let's change this around. And I think a part, like what we're doing with One Marlborough is, or what one of the byproducts of it is you're inspiring people to act. Right. Before One Marlborough, like before it even happened, I was going to Boston to protest because I didn't think that the community in Marlborough was for the movement. I was like, it's a suburb, I know there's other Black people here, but I don't think that we have allies here. That's what my first thing was. I don't think they really care. So I'm gonna go out to Boston, and the thing was, I was really sick of all the false information that was going around. Right? They're saying like, oh, the protesters did this, they're this, did that. I mean, I'm gonna go there and I'm gonna see it for myself. And when we went, and I went to Boston multiple times. Like I remember we were going like every day of the week, when the protests were hot, and yeah, there was rubber bullets, like all that. It was there, and we were documenting everything. And what we would do is we would share it on social media. And what I realized is by just doing that, other people started to reach out and say, hey, we definitely want to help. We want next time, could we go with you? Or hey, can we do something like that in Marlborough? And then that's when I started to realize, how you can immobilize people, how you can inspire them to really act. And it's just by doing it. Right? It's just sharing a video or just sharing some information.
Absolutely.
Because you never know who's going to see it. Right? It wasn't like I saw George Floyd and I said, okay, I'm going to go out and protest. I'm going to do this. It was, I saw what happened. And I felt like at that time I saw it. I've seen so many videos of Black people getting killed. I was kind of numb to it. I was just like, oh man, again.
Yeah.
I was like, oh man, again. But then as people were starting to share videos of other demonstrations, right? Other people speaking, other people going out to protest. And then seeing that, and then me being at home in Marlborough, like in my bed, I'm like, I can't just sit here and do nothing. Like I need to do something. Like it wasn't sitting right in my spirit. So I got out, started doing something, but it all started with me seeing what people were sharing on social media.
Absolutely. And I'd tell you to in my view, as critical as the Boston, protests were, it was really about, seeing these protests in communities across the state, quite honestly, given that, Massachusetts is still a mostly white state, it was, these small communities where you had a lot of, white allies doing a protest, even if it was 10 or 20 people. That's really had an impact. I represent, communities like Ayer and Shirley, which interestingly have a relatively, or at least a higher Black population than many people would expect. A lot of it related to when it was a military base. Given the significant percentage of Black Americans that serve in the military. And so, what's happening in the Ayer Shirley schools now, which has sort of become public this week, is that a lot of the Black students are, complaining about, double standards and how they're being treated in the schools. And, just to have, those protests, to have people speaking out, people from all backgrounds, I don't think it's something that's going to be swept under the rug. I think there's going to be a focus on it. I think it's going to be difficult, but that's just been really encouraging to see to happen even in sort of these smaller rural communities.
Yeah. Like I said, I was super surprised or super taken back just like from our first event. Just to seeing all the people that was there. Like in Marlborough, I grew up going to the Boys and Girls Club, and I guess I was on the football team, and like just seeing all my old friends again. Seeing the counselors, encouraging me. It was really nice to see that. Because it's like you always know, like, is that a good guy? And then you see him, and like, that's a good guy. That's a good person. So it is, and I feel like with some people. Or what I come across is some people will say like, oh, how do I start something like that on my own, or how can I get people to participate? I always say, sharing on social media definitely helps. It's the quickest way to get information to other people. Just like I said, when we were going to these demonstrations in Boston, I was recording, taking pictures, not just to show people I was there, but it was like, this is what's happening, right? We're in a pandemic, right? So it's not like, I understand why some people can't get up and leave. Like, we all have families to come back home to. So I never looked at anyone wrong, or if they said that they didn't want to go out with me, it's like, that's fine. Like, I'm going to go out. Just do you mind sharing what I post? And like, yeah, I'll do it 100%. So, that's the kind of agreement I have with, like, people that are in my circle. And again, like, it's doing things like that that really help inspire people. So eventually what I hope is that by us continuing to do this work inside of our communities, that will inspire other people to get more involved, either to get more involved in their community, or say, you know what, I am going to go for that teacher position, or you know what, I am going to run for a spot in local office. So that's what I'm hoping for, and I feel like it's going to happen.
Well, that is terrific. And Mike, I could talk to you for so much longer. I really actually love getting to know you better. I didn't know, some of your background and where you lived before Marlborough. But I want to thank you so much for what you're doing with One Marlborough. Thanks for coming on the Uplifting Voices podcast, and really appreciate the dialogue. I know it'll continue, and I'm excited to see the next work of yourself and other Black leaders and community leaders in Marlborough to address racial justice in the city. So thanks so much for coming on. Really pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for everybody who tuned in. And Mike, I'm sure I'll talk to you soon, and have a wonderful night. Okay. Thanks again.
Yeah.
Yep. Bye-bye.